The blood on the shirt was dried brown and crusted, but Olivia Bennett could still see where the bullet had torn through the blue chambray fabric, leaving a ragged hole just below the collar. She stood behind the counter of her small shop on Unionville's Main Street, Nevada dust filtering through the afternoon sunlight that slanted across the wooden floor, and studied the cowboy who had just walked in with the damaged garment draped over his arm. "Can you fix it?" he asked, his voice rough like gravel underfoot. He was tall, probably in his mid-20s, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of the sage that grew wild in the hills surrounding town. His name was Kieran Morgan, though Olivia did not know that yet. She took the shirt from him, her fingers tracing the torn edges carefully. "The hole can be mended, but the bloodstain might not come out completely. Was this yours, my brother's?" Something flickered across his face, quick as summer lightning. "He does not need it anymore." Olivia understood immediately what that meant. Death was common enough in 1882, especially in mining towns like Unionville, where men took risks daily either underground or above it, where disputes were settled with fists and guns, where sickness could take a person before the doctor even arrived from the next town over. She had seen enough grief in her 22 years to recognize it in the set of someone's shoulders, in the way they held themselves like they were afraid of breaking apart. "I am sorry for your loss," she said quietly. "I will do my best with it. How much?" $2. He nodded, fishing coins from his pocket and placing them on the counter with calloused fingers that suggested hard work, outdoor work, the kind that left a man's hands scarred and strong. "When should I come back?" "A week. Maybe less if I can get to it sooner." "A week is fine." He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture so automatic it seemed almost unconscious, and turned to leave. At the door, he paused. "My name is Kieran Morgan. Olivia Bennett." "Thank you, Miss Bennett." After he left, Olivia held the shirt up to the light again. The fabric was good quality, well made, probably purchased from one of the better stores in Virginia City before being worn nearly threadbare. She could see where it had been mended before, small, careful stitches along one seam that suggested someone in the family knew their way around a needle. His mother, perhaps, or his brother's wife. She wondered which one, wondered about the story behind this shirt and the man who had worn it and the brother who now wanted it repaired. The shop had been her father's before consumption took him the previous winter. Ephraim Bennett had been the town tailor, and he had taught Olivia everything he knew, starting when she was barely tall enough to reach the cutting table. Her mother had died bringing her into the world, so it had always been just the two of them in the small house behind the shop, sharing meals and work, and the comfortable silence that came from truly knowing another person. When he died, she inherited both the business and the loneliness. She set Kieran Morgan's shirt aside and returned to the dress. She had been altering for Margaret Thornton, the banker's wife, who had very specific ideas about fashion and very little patience for delays. The afternoon passed in the familiar rhythm of needle through fabric, thread pulled taut, the small repetitive motions that had shaped her life for as long as she could remember. That evening, after closing the shop, Olivia sat in the back room with the damaged shirt spread across her lap. She had soaked it in cold water with salt to lift the bloodstain, and while it had faded, a shadow remained, ghost pale against the blue fabric. She began the delicate work of mending the bullet hole, her needle moving in tiny, precise stitches that would hold the fabric together while remaining nearly invisible. As she worked, she thought about Kieran Morgan and the grief in his eyes, and she wondered what had happened to his brother. Unionville was not a large town. At its peak a few years earlier, it had boasted nearly 3,000 residents, but the declining silver yields had driven many away to chase new strikes in other parts of Nevada, or to return to wherever they had come from before gold fever brought them west. Now perhaps 1,000 people remained, the ones stubborn enough or desperate enough, or simply committed enough to stay. Olivia knew most of them by sight if not by name, but she could not recall seeing Kieran Morgan before. She finished the mending by lamplight, her eyes straining in the golden glow. The repair was good, nearly invisible, the kind of work her father would have been proud of. She folded the shirt carefully and set it on the shelf behind the counter where she kept completed orders, a small paper tag with Kieran Morgan's name pinned to the collar. The week passed in its usual fashion. She altered 2 dresses, took in a pair of trousers, replaced buttons on 3 shirts, and made a new suit for Thomas Crawford, who was courting the schoolteacher and wanted to look his best. She worked from dawn until dusk, pausing only for simple meals and the occasional conversation when customers lingered to chat. It was a solitary life, but not an unhappy one. She had her work, her small home, the respect that came from being skilled at what she did. It was more than many women had. On the 7th day, precisely 1 week after his first visit, Kieran Morgan walked back through her door. He had cleaned up since their last meeting, his hair trimmed, his face freshly shaved, wearing a clean shirt and trousers that looked recently brushed. He removed his hat as he entered, holding it in both hands. "Miss Bennett, Mr. Morgan, your shirt is ready." She retrieved it from the shelf and unfolded it on the counter so he could inspect her work. He leaned close, studying the repair, his fingers tracing over the mended area. She caught the scent of soap and leather and something else, something that reminded her of sagebrush after rain. "This is excellent work," he said softly. "I cannot even see where the tear was. That is the goal." She felt an unexpected warmth at his praise. The stain faded but did not disappear completely. "That is all right, I expected that." He folded the shirt carefully, almost reverently. "Do you take other work besides mending? What kind of work?" "I need 2 new shirts. Work shirts, nothing fancy. Would you be willing to make them?" She studied him for a moment. Most men bought their work clothes ready-made from the general store or ordered from catalogs. Custom-made garments cost more, and cowboys typically did not have that kind of money to spare. "I could, but it would be more expensive than buying them already made." "I know, but I want them to fit properly and last, and I have seen the quality of your work." He met her eyes directly. "How much?" $6 each, including the fabric. "I would need to take your measurements." "That is fair." She retrieved her measuring tape and notebook, the same ones her father had used, the tape soft with age and marked in faded ink. "Stand straight, please, with your arms at your sides." Kieran obeyed, standing still as a statue while she worked. She tried to maintain professional distance, to see him simply as another customer. But she could not help noticing the breadth of his shoulders, the lean strength of his build, the way he smelled like sun-warmed cotton and the outdoors. She took her measurements quickly and efficiently, recording each one in her notebook, careful not to let her fingers linger. "What color?" she asked when she finished. "1 blue, 1 gray." "I will need 2 weeks, maybe 3. I have other orders ahead of yours." "That is fine." "Should I pay now or when they are ready?" "Half now, half on delivery." He counted out $6 and placed them on the counter. As she took the money, their fingers brushed, just barely, just enough for her to feel the warmth of his skin and the roughness of his calluses. She pulled her hand back quickly, unsettled by the small flutter the contact had caused in her chest. "Thank you, Miss Bennett. I will come back in 2 weeks to check on the progress." After he left, Olivia stood at the counter for a long moment, her measuring tape still in her hand, trying to understand why her heart was beating faster than it should. She told herself it was only because he was a new customer, a promising one who might bring more business, but she knew that was not quite true. There was something about Kieran Morgan that unsettled her, something in the way he looked at her, direct and serious, like she mattered. She shook her head and returned to her work. She had no time for foolish thoughts. She had a business to run, customers to serve, a life that depended on her ability to focus on the practical rather than the impossible. But that night, lying in bed in the small house behind the shop, she found herself thinking about his eyes and the way he had handled his brother's shirt, so careful and sad, and she wondered again what had happened, what loss had brought him to her door. 2 weeks later, Kieran returned. The shirts were not finished yet. She had been delayed by an urgent order from the hotel for new tablecloths, but she had completed one of them and wanted to check the fit before finishing the second. When he tried it on, she saw immediately that the shoulders needed slight adjustment and the sleeves could be shortened by half an inch. She pinned the changes while he stood patiently in the middle of her shop, and she tried not to notice how the blue fabric brought out the color of his eyes. "Come back in 4 days," she said. "Both will be ready then." "All right." He hesitated, seeming to want to say something more, but ultimately just nodded and left. 4 days later, he came back. She had both shirts ready, perfectly fitted, and he tried them on one after the other and pronounced himself satisfied. As he paid the remaining $6, he said, "I have a vest that needs mending. Tore it on a fence post last week. Could you fix it? Of course. Bring it by whenever you like." "I will bring it tomorrow if that is convenient." "Tomorrow is fine." He did bring it the next day, and she mended it, and when he came to collect it a week later, he had another small job for her, a pair of trousers that needed hemming, then a button replaced, then a tear in a coat sleeve. Always something small, something that could wait, but something that gave him a reason to return. It took Olivia 3 months to realize what he was doing. She was not a woman well versed in courtship. Her father's illness had dominated her late teenage years, leaving little time for the dances and socials where young people typically met and paired off. After his death, she had been too busy keeping the business afloat and too wrapped in grief to think about romance. The few men who had shown interest had been put off by her self-sufficiency, or her sharp tongue, or simply her lack of encouragement. She had convinced herself she was content alone. But as spring turned toward summer and Kieran Morgan continued to appear in her shop every week without fail, always with some small mending job, always polite and respectful but lingering to talk, asking about her day, telling her small stories about his work on the ranch outside town where he raised horses, she began to understand. He was courting her. In his own quiet, patient way, he was courting her. The realization struck her one evening as she sat in her back room, hemming yet another pair of his trousers that probably did not really need hemming. She set down her needle and simply sat there, the fabric in her lap, feeling something warm and unfamiliar unfurl in her chest. Kieran Morgan was courting her, and she did not mind. In fact, if she was being honest with herself, she had come to look forward to his visits. She found herself taking extra care with her appearance on the days he typically came, pinning her dark hair more carefully, wearing her better dresses, lingering near the shop window in the afternoon. She caught herself smiling when she heard his boots on the wooden sidewalk outside, her heart lifting at the familiar sound of his approach, but she had no idea what to do about it. The next time he came to collect his trousers, she was behind the counter when he walked in. The June sunlight made the dust motes dance in the air between them. He removed his hat and held it against his chest. "Miss Bennett." "Mr. Morgan." She retrieved his trousers from the shelf. "These are ready." He took them, inspected her work with the careful attention he always gave her mending, and nodded his satisfaction. "Perfect, as always. What do I owe you?" 50 cents. He paid her, and she expected him to leave, but instead he stood there, turning his hat in his hands, clearly working up the nerve to say something. She waited, her own nerves suddenly taut as drawn thread. "Miss Bennett, I wonder if you might do me the honor of having dinner with me. Saturday evening, if you are free." There it was. The question she had known was coming but had not quite believed would arrive. She looked at him, at his serious face and hopeful eyes, and felt her heart hammering against her ribs. "I would like that," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Yes, Saturday evening would be fine. The smile that broke across his face transformed him, made him look younger, less burdened. "Good, that is very good. I will call for you at 6 if that suits you." 6 is perfect. After he left, Olivia sank onto the stool behind her counter and pressed her hands to her warm cheeks. She was going to have dinner with Kieran Morgan. She was going to have dinner with a man who had been coming to her shop every week for months, inventing reasons to see her, waiting until she was ready to understand. Saturday arrived with agonizing slowness. Olivia worked through her orders, but her mind kept drifting to the evening ahead. She had only 2 decent dresses suitable for dinner, and she spent far too long deciding between them, before finally settling on the deep green one that her father had always said brought out the amber flecks in her brown eyes. When Kieran arrived at 6, she was ready, her hair pinned up in a way that had taken 3 attempts to get right, her hands trembling slightly as she opened the door. He stood on her small porch in a clean suit that looked new, his hair still damp from washing, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers that he must have picked from the hills outside town. "These are for you." He offered the flowers, looking almost shy. "Thank you. They are beautiful." She took them, their stems tied together with a piece of grass, simple and perfect. She put them in a glass of water on her kitchen table, then took the shawl he held for her. He offered his arm, and she took it, feeling the solid strength of him beneath the fabric of his jacket. They walked together through the evening streets of Unionville, past the saloons and shops and houses, heading toward the hotel dining room, which was the nicest restaurant in town. Over dinner, roast beef and potatoes and green beans that actually tasted fresh. They talked more openly than they ever had in her shop. He told her about his ranch, the small piece of land he had bought 2 years earlier with money saved from years of cowboy work, how he was building up a herd of horses to sell to the army and to other ranches. She told him about learning the tailoring trade from her father, about the satisfaction of creating something useful with her own hands, about how lonely the shop felt sometimes now that she ran it alone. "Your brother," she said carefully, remembering the bloodstained shirt that had brought him to her in the first place. "The one whose shirt I mended. What happened to him, if you do not mind me asking?" Kieran's expression grew solemn. "His name was Nathaniel. He was 2 years younger than me, and he was always the bold one, the one who took risks. He got into a card game with some men passing through town. There was an argument about whether someone was cheating. Nathan was not the one who drew first, but he was the one who died. I am so sorry. It has been almost 6 months now, but some days it still does not feel real." He looked down at his plate. "He was my only family. Our parents died years ago. It was just the 2 of us." Olivia reached across the table and laid her hand over his. "I understand. When my father died, I kept expecting him to walk through the door, to call my name from the workshop. That feeling that they should still be here, it takes a long time to fade." He turned his hand over and laced his fingers through hers, and they sat like that for a moment. 2 people who had known loss, finding comfort in the simple contact. After dinner, he walked her home through the cooling evening, the Nevada sky turning deep purple overhead, stars beginning to emerge in their thousands. At her door, he turned to face her, still holding her hand. "I have been coming to your shop for months," he said quietly. "Making up excuses, bringing you mending that probably did not really need doing. I think you know that. I do know. I figured it out a few months ago. And you did not tell me to stop coming. No, I did not want you to stop." He smiled at that, and then, very slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, he leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle and brief, his lips warm against hers, and when he pulled back she felt breathless and warm and more alive than she had in years. "May I see you again?" he asked. "Yes. Please, yes." Over the following weeks, Kieran courted her properly. He took her to church socials and community dances, on walks through the sagebrush hills, on picnics beside the small creek that ran past his ranch. He introduced her to his horses, a dozen sturdy animals with intelligent eyes, and she watched him work with them, patient and kind, never raising his voice or his hand. She saw the way he moved through the world, steady and honest, and she felt herself falling in love with him, helpless as tumbling off a cliff. He still came to her shop every week, but now he did not pretend to need mending. He simply came to see her, to sit on the stool beside her work table while she sewed, telling her about his day, asking about hers, content just to be in her presence. Sometimes he would read aloud to her from the newspaper while she worked, his voice a pleasant rumble that filled the shop's silence. Other times they simply sat together, comfortable in the quiet that came from truly knowing another person. By late summer, Olivia could no longer imagine her life without him in it. He had become essential to her, like air or water, something she needed to survive. But he had not spoken of marriage, and she did not know how to raise the subject herself. She told herself to be patient, that he would speak when he was ready, but doubt gnawed at her in the long hours of the night when she lay alone in her bed, wondering if perhaps she had misread the situation, if perhaps he did not want the same future she did. Then September came, and with it the evening that changed everything. Kieran arrived at her shop near closing time, his face tight with some emotion she could not read. She locked the door behind him and turned to find him pacing, agitated, his hat crushed in his hands. "What is wrong?" She went to him immediately, alarmed. "Kieran, what happened?" "I have been offered a contract," he said. "A big one. The army wants to buy 30 horses, good quality, trained for cavalry work. It is more money than I have made in 2 years combined. It would secure the ranch, let me expand, let me build a proper house instead of the half-finished cabin I have been living in." "But that is wonderful news. Why do you look so troubled?" "Because I have to deliver them to Fort Churchill by the end of October, and I do not have 30 trained horses ready. I have maybe 15 that are suitable. I need to buy more, young stock, and train them hard for the next 6 weeks. It will take every hour of every day. I will not have time for anything else," understanding dawned. "You will not have time to visit. No, I will be working from dawn to past dark, every single day, and even then I am not certain I can get them all ready in time." He stopped pacing and turned to face her, his eyes intense. "Olivia, I need to ask you something, and I know the timing is terrible, but I cannot wait any longer." Her heart began to pound. "What is it? These past months with you have been the happiest of my life. You make me laugh, you make me think. You make me want to be better than I am. I love the way you focus when you are working, the little crease you get between your eyebrows when you are concentrating. I love your sharp wit and your kind heart and the way you understand loss without needing it explained. I love you, Olivia Bennett, and I want to marry you." The words hung in the air between them, huge and wonderful and terrifying. Olivia felt tears prick her eyes. "I do not have a ring yet," he continued, his words tumbling over each other in his rush to get them out. "I was planning to go to Virginia City next month to buy one, to do this properly, but I cannot wait that long. I cannot spend the next 6 weeks apart from you without knowing if you feel the same way. So I am asking now, without a ring, without any proper preparation, just me and my heart in my hands. Will you marry me?" "Yes," she said, the word breaking on a sob. "Yes, Kieran, of course yes." He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet, and she laughed through her tears as he spun her around in the narrow space between her work table and the counter. When he set her down, he kissed her properly, deep and thorough, and she kissed him back with all the love and longing she had been holding inside for months. "I love you," she said when they finally broke apart. "I have loved you for so long. Then you understand why I have to focus on this contract for the next weeks. It is not that I do not want to see you every moment of every day, because I do, but this money, it will give us a real future. I can finish the house, make it nice for you. I can buy more land, build up the herd, create something stable and lasting. I understand, and I will be here when you are finished. I am not going anywhere." Relief washed over his face. "When this contract is complete, we will do this right. I will buy you a proper ring, we will have a proper wedding, everything you deserve." "I do not need fancy things," she said, touching his face. "I just need you." But he shook his head. "You deserve everything good in this world, and I intend to give it to you." They talked for another hour, sitting together in the growing darkness of her shop, making plans and promises, reluctant to part, but knowing he had to get back to his ranch, to the long weeks of work that lay ahead. When he finally left, Olivia locked the door behind him and leaned against it, her hand pressed to her racing heart, hardly able to believe what had just happened. She was engaged. She was going to marry Kieran Morgan. The next 6 weeks were the longest of Olivia's life. True to his word, Kieran did not come to town. She knew he was working from before dawn until after dark, training horses that needed to be cavalry ready in an impossibly short time. She worried about him, hoped he was eating properly and getting enough sleep, but she had to trust that he knew what he was doing. She threw herself into her own work, taking every order that came her way, saving money for their future. In the evenings, she worked on a special project. A new shirt for Kieran, made from the finest fabric she could afford, every stitch perfect, a wedding gift to replace the bloodstained shirt that had first brought him to her door. News filtered into town through the ranch hands who came in for supplies. Kieran had bought 12 young horses from a breeder in Austin. He was working them hard, barely stopping to sleep. He had hired 2 temporary hands to help with the training. The fort commander had come to inspect the herd at the 3-week mark and had seemed pleased with the progress. Olivia heard it all secondhand and ached to see him, to touch him, to reassure herself that he was all right. But she had promised to wait, and so she waited. October arrived with cooler temperatures and the first hint of autumn in the air. The cottonwoods along the creek began to turn gold. The summer's heat finally broke. And on the 15th of the month, Kieran Morgan drove 30 trained horses through Unionville's Main Street, heading north toward Fort Churchill, and he stopped at Olivia's shop just long enough to lean down from his saddle and kiss her breathless in full view of anyone who happened to be watching. "5 days," he said. "Give me 5 days to deliver these horses and collect my payment, and then I am yours forever." "Be safe," she said, her hand on his knee, not wanting to let him go even though she knew she must. "Always." She watched him ride away, the horses flowing behind him like a river, and she felt pride and love and anticipation all tangled together in her chest. He returned on the 5th day, just as he had promised, riding into town in the late afternoon with a bank draft in his pocket and a silver ring in a velvet box. He went straight to her shop, and this time when he proposed, he did it properly, down on one knee in her back room, offering her the ring with hands that trembled slightly. "Olivia Bennett, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," she said, laughing because he already knew the answer, because they had already had this conversation 6 weeks earlier, but she understood that he needed to do this right. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, a simple silver band with a small diamond that caught the light, and it fit perfectly, like it had been made for her, like she had been made for him. They were married 3 weeks later in Unionville's small church, with half the town in attendance. Olivia wore a dress she had made herself, cream-colored silk she had ordered specially from San Francisco, with seed pearls sewn along the bodice in a pattern like scattered stars. Margaret Thornton cried through the entire ceremony. Thomas Crawford served as Kieran's best man. The minister spoke about love and commitment and the sacred bond of marriage, and when he pronounced them husband and wife, Kieran kissed her like she was the most precious thing in the world. They held the reception in the hotel dining room, with music and dancing and more food than Olivia had seen in one place since before her father died. People congratulated them, pressed gifts into their hands, wished them well. Olivia danced with Kieran until her feet hurt, his hand warm on her waist, his eyes never leaving her face. As the evening wound down, they slipped away from the celebration and walked through the quiet streets to Kieran's ranch, which was now their ranch. He carried her over the threshold of the house he had finished just days before, and she looked around at the solid walls, the real floor, the furniture he had built with his own hands, and she felt tears sting her eyes. "It is not fancy," he said, sounding uncertain. "But it is strong, and it is ours. It is perfect." She turned to face him, her husband, this man who had come into her shop 6 months earlier with a bloodstained shirt and a heart full of grief, who had courted her with patience and small acts of mending, who had waited for her to understand. "You are perfect." "I am not perfect," he said, pulling her close, "but I will spend every day trying to be worthy of you." That night, in the bedroom of their new home, with the Nevada stars bright outside the window, they came together as husband and wife, and Olivia finally understood what it meant to be truly known, truly loved, truly home. The next morning, she woke wrapped in Kieran's arms, his breath warm against her hair, and she felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. This was what she had been missing all those years alone in her shop, working and surviving but not quite living. This connection, this partnership, this love. "Good morning, wife," Kieran murmured against her temple, his voice still rough with sleep. "Good morning, husband." They lay there for a while, reluctant to break the peaceful intimacy of the moment, but eventually the day called them. Kieran had horses to tend and fences to mend. Olivia needed to go into town to the shop, to let her customers know she was married but still working, still taking orders. They established a routine quickly. Olivia would go to the shop each morning, and Kieran would work the ranch, and they would meet back at the house each evening to share meals and stories, and the comfortable domesticity of a life built together. Sometimes she brought mending home to work on in the evenings while he did his bookkeeping. Other times they simply sat together on the porch and watched the sun set over the sagebrush hills. It was not always easy. The ranch demanded constant work, and there were setbacks. A fence broke and 2 horses got out, taking hours to round up. A late autumn storm damaged part of the barn roof. A buyer backed out of a promised purchase, leaving Kieran scrambling to find another market for 3 trained mounts. But they faced each challenge together, and Olivia discovered she was stronger than she had known. She learned to help with the horses, to mend tack and harness, to keep the ranch books. Kieran learned to cook basic meals so she did not have to come home from a long day at the shop to an empty kitchen. They learned each other's rhythms and moods, when to push and when to give space, how to fight fairly and make up thoroughly. By Christmas, Olivia knew she was pregnant. She had missed her monthly courses twice, and her breasts were tender, and certain smells made her queasy. She chose Christmas morning to tell Kieran, wrapping the tiny shirt she had sewn in secret and placing it among the gifts under the small pine tree he had cut from the hills. He opened it last, after the socks she had knitted him and the new gloves she had made from soft leather. He pulled back the paper and stared at the tiny garment in his hands, his face going through a series of expressions too quick to name. Olivia. His voice was choked. "Are you telling me?" "You are going to be a father," she said, smiling through sudden tears. "In late June, if I have calculated correctly." He set the tiny shirt down very carefully and gathered her into his arms, holding her like she was made of glass, like she might break. She felt his shoulders shaking and realized he was crying, silent tears of joy and wonder and perhaps fear, because bringing a child into the world was terrifying and miraculous in equal measure. "I am going to be a father," he said against her hair. "We are going to have a baby." "Yes." "I promise you, Olivia, I promise I will be a good father. I will keep you both safe. I will work hard and provide for you and make sure our child never wants for anything." "I know you will. I have never doubted that." The winter passed and spring arrived and Olivia's belly grew round. She continued working in the shop until May, when the heat and her size made it too difficult. Kieran worried over her constantly, insisting she rest, bringing her water and food and anything else she might need. She found his attention both touching and occasionally suffocating, and she had to remind him gently that pregnancy was not an illness, that women had been bearing children since the beginning of time. But secretly, she loved his attentiveness, the way he would place his hand on her belly and feel their child kick, the wonder on his face every time. She loved watching him prepare for fatherhood, building a cradle from smooth pine, child-proofing the house, planning for the future. In late June, on a night when the heat lay heavy even after the sun went down, Olivia's labor began. Kieran rode hard into town to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Ruth Simmons, who had delivered half the babies in Unionville over the past 20 years. Ruth arrived calm and prepared, and she banished Kieran from the bedroom with firm instructions to boil water and stay out of the way. Labor was long and hard, lasting through the night and into the next day. Olivia had known it would hurt, but the reality was beyond anything she had imagined. Waves of pain that built and crested and receded only to build again. Ruth coached her through it, patient and steady, and from the other room she could hear Kieran pacing, his boots a constant rhythm on the wooden floor. Finally, as the afternoon sun slanted through the bedroom window, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that seemed impossibly loud for such a small person. Ruth cleaned him and wrapped him in the blanket Olivia had made and placed him in her arms, and Olivia looked down at the tiny red face and felt her heart crack open with a love so fierce it took her breath away. "You have a son," Ruth called toward the door. "You can come in now, father." Kieran burst into the room like he had been shot from a cannon, his face wild with fear and hope. When he saw Olivia sitting up in bed, tired but smiling, their baby in her arms, his expression transformed into pure joy. "Is he all right? Are you all right? We are both fine. Come meet your son." He approached slowly, almost reverently, and sat on the edge of the bed. Olivia placed the baby in his arms, showing him how to support the head, and watched as Kieran looked down at their child for the first time. The expression on his face was something she would remember for the rest of her life, wonder and terror and love all mixed together. "He is so small," Kieran whispered. "So perfect. What should we name him?" Kieran looked up at her, tears streaming down his face. "I would like to call him Nathaniel, after my brother, if that is acceptable to you." Olivia felt her own eyes fill. "I think that is perfect, Nathaniel Morgan, our son." Ruth stayed for a few hours to make sure both mother and baby were doing well, then packed up her supplies and left with instructions for care and feeding, and a promise to check in the next day. Kieran refused to leave Olivia's side, sitting in the chair beside the bed while she nursed the baby, his hand on her shoulder, protective and tender. That night, with Nathaniel asleep in his cradle beside their bed, Kieran held Olivia close and spoke into the darkness. "A year ago, I was alone. My brother was dead, and I thought I would spend the rest of my life alone, just me and the horses and the work. Then I brought that shirt to your shop, and you mended it with such care, and something in me knew. I did not understand it at first, but some part of me knew you were important, that you were meant to be part of my life." "I knew too," Olivia said softly. "Maybe not right away, but soon. You kept coming back, week after week, and each time I was happier to see you. It took me a while to understand what that meant. I would have kept coming back forever, inventing more and more absurd reasons to need mending, until you either agreed to court me or told me to leave you alone." She laughed quietly. "I am glad I figured it out before you ran out of clothes to mend." "Me too." He kissed her forehead. "Thank you for our son. Thank you for this life. Thank you for being willing to see me, to love me, to build something with me. Thank you for being patient, for waiting until I understood." They lay in the peaceful darkness, listening to their son's small sleeping sounds, and Olivia felt complete in a way she never had before. This was her family. This was her life. This was everything she had not known she was missing, until Kieran Morgan walked through her door with a bloodstained shirt and hope in his eyes. The months that followed were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Nathaniel was a healthy baby but a demanding one, waking multiple times each night to nurse, crying when he was wet or hungry or simply wanted to be held. Olivia moved through the days in a haze of sleeplessness, marveling at how such a small person could so completely upend their lives. Kieran was a devoted father, changing diapers and walking the floor with a fussy baby at 2 in the morning, singing off key lullabies that somehow soothed their son when nothing else would. Olivia watched him with Nathaniel and fell in love with him all over again, seeing the gentleness in him, the deep well of patience, the fierce protectiveness that colored everything he did. When Nathaniel was 3 months old, Olivia returned to the shop part-time, leaving the baby with Margaret Thornton, who had raised 4 children of her own and was delighted to help. It felt good to work again, to use her mind and hands for something other than childcare, though she found herself hurrying through her tasks so she could get back to her son, missing him even though she had only been gone a few hours. Life settled into a new rhythm. The ranch grew slowly but steadily. Kieran built up his herd and his reputation, and buyers began seeking him out specifically for his well-trained horses. Olivia's shop remained successful, her skill with a needle keeping a steady stream of customers coming through her door. They were not rich, but they were comfortable, able to put away small amounts of money each month, planning for a future that seemed bright and full of possibility. Nathaniel grew from infant to toddler, learning to crawl and then walk, getting into everything, keeping them constantly on their toes. He had Kieran's dark hair and Olivia's brown eyes, and his personality was a mix of both of them, serious and focused one moment, laughing and playful the next. When Nathaniel was 2 years old, Olivia found herself pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect, or perhaps simply because her body remembered what to do. She continued working until the very end, and when her labor started on a cool March evening, she was calm, ready, almost eager to meet this new child. Their daughter was born just after midnight, smaller than Nathaniel had been but perfectly healthy, with a full head of dark hair and lungs that worked very well indeed. They named her Sarah, after Olivia's mother whom she had never known, and Kieran cried again, just as he had with Nathaniel, overwhelmed by the miracle of it. With 2 young children, the house felt full and chaotic in the best way. Nathaniel was initially suspicious of his baby sister, uncertain about this small creature who took up so much of his mother's attention. But he gradually warmed to her, learning to be gentle, bringing her toys, singing the same off-key lullabies his father sang. The years passed in that way, marked by small moments and large ones, by the everyday routines of family life and the occasional crisis. There was the time Nathaniel fell from a fence and broke his arm. The winter that Sarah came down with a terrible cough that had them terrified until she finally recovered. The drought year when the grass withered and Kieran had to buy feed to keep the horses healthy. The fire at Olivia's shop that destroyed half her inventory but thankfully hurt no one. Through it all, they had each other. Kieran and Olivia facing each challenge as partners, talking through problems, supporting each other, their love deepening and maturing with each passing season. They still made time for themselves, stealing moments alone when the children were asleep, going for walks in the evening, sitting together on the porch and talking about everything and nothing. When Nathaniel was 7 and Sarah 5, Olivia found herself pregnant once more, unexpected but not unwelcome. This baby, another son, they named Thomas, and he completed their family in a way they had not known was missing. Thomas was an easy baby, content and cheerful, and his older siblings doted on him, fighting over who got to hold him, to help feed him, to make him laugh. Olivia closed the shop when Thomas was born. She had been considering it for a while, feeling pulled too thin between her business and her family, and the new baby made the decision clear. She sold the building to a young tailor who had just arrived in Unionville and used the money to make improvements to the ranch, to secure their children's future. It was the right choice. She did not miss the shop as much as she had feared she might. She had her children to care for, and she took up mending again at home, taking select orders from long-time customers, enough to keep her skills sharp and bring in a little extra money without overwhelming her. She discovered she loved being home, loved the controlled chaos of life with 3 young children, loved watching them grow and learn and become their own people. Kieran expanded the ranch, buying adjoining land when it became available, increasing his herd. He hired hands to help with the work, young cowboys who reminded Olivia of Kieran when she had first met him, serious and hardworking, trying to build something for themselves. Nathaniel began working alongside his father as soon as he was old enough, learning the horse business from the ground up, and Olivia saw the pride in Kieran's eyes when he watched their son work. Sarah was different from her brothers, quieter and more studious, preferring books to horses. She learned to read early and devoured every book she could get her hands on, and Olivia saw something of herself in her daughter, that same inward focus, that contentment with solitary pursuits. Thomas was the wild one, always getting into mischief, keeping everyone on their toes, but impossible to stay angry with because of his infectious laugh and genuine remorse when he got caught. The years continued to pass. The children grew. Unionville changed around them, shrinking further as the mines continued to decline, but the Morgan family remained constant, a fixture in the community. Kieran served on the town council. Olivia helped organize church socials and school events. They were respected, established, part of the fabric of the town's life. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Kieran took Olivia back to the hotel dining room where they had had their first date. The children stayed with Margaret Thornton, who was older now but still capable and delighted to help. Kieran and Olivia dressed in their best clothes and sat across from each other at the same table where they had sat all those years before, and they talked and laughed like the young couple they had been, though so much had changed since then. "Do you remember," Kieran said, holding her hand across the table, "that first time I came to your shop, with Nathaniel's shirt, of course? I remember thinking you looked so sad. I wanted to help you, even though I did not know you at all. I remember thinking you had kind eyes and competent hands. I trusted you immediately with something that was precious to me. And then you kept coming back. I could not help myself. I would finish a job and immediately look for something, anything that needed mending, just so I would have an excuse to see you again." Olivia laughed. "I know. I figured it out eventually. Do you remember that vest you brought in? The one you claimed you tore on a fence post? That tear was so obviously made with a knife, not snagged on wood. I almost called you out on it." Kieran had the grace to look sheepish. "I was running out of legitimate reasons to visit. I might have gotten a bit desperate. You could have just asked me to dinner from the beginning. I was afraid you would say no. I thought if you got to know me first, gradually, you might be more inclined to say yes when I finally worked up the nerve to ask. It worked. Yes, it did." He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture that still made her heart flutter even after 15 years of marriage. "I would do it all again. Every awkward visit, every invented reason, every moment of uncertainty. All of it was worth it to end up here with you, with our family, with this life we have built." "I would not change a thing," Olivia agreed. "Well, maybe one thing I wish I had understood sooner. I wish I had not made you wait so long. The waiting made it sweeter, and it gave me time to be certain, to know without any doubt that you were the one I wanted to spend my life with." They finished their dinner and walked home through the quiet streets, arms around each other, moving together like they had been doing it forever, which they had. The house was dark when they arrived, the children already asleep, and they tiptoed past the bedrooms where their children dreamed, then closed their own bedroom door and came together with the easy familiarity of long partnership and the enduring passion that had never quite faded. Later, lying in the darkness with Kieran's arm around her, Olivia thought about the path that had brought them to this moment. If Kieran's brother had not been killed, if Kieran had not needed that shirt mended, if he had gone to a different seamstress, or decided the shirt was beyond repair, if any one of 100 small things had been different, they might never have met. Their children might never have been born. This whole beautiful life might never have existed. But Nathaniel had died, tragic and senseless, and from that grief had come something good. Not that the good erased the tragedy, not that Kieran would not still have preferred his brother alive, but they had taken the broken pieces and built something new, something strong and lasting. "What are you thinking about?" Kieran murmured, half asleep. "How grateful I am for you. For our family, for all of it. Me too." He pulled her closer. "Every single day, me too." More years passed. Nathaniel grew into a young man, tall and serious like his father, with a gift for working with horses that surpassed even Kieran's. Sarah continued her studies and shocked everyone by announcing she wanted to be a teacher, pursuing education at a time when few women did. Thomas proved to have a head for business and began managing the ranch's finances, keeping meticulous books that allowed them to expand further. Kieran's hair began to go gray at the temples. Olivia found herself needing spectacles for close work. They watched their children becoming adults and felt the strange mix of pride and melancholy that comes from seeing the people you raised becoming independent, needing you less. When Nathaniel was 22, he announced he was courting a girl from one of the neighboring ranches, a practical young woman named Emma who could rope a steer and birth a foal, and was not intimidated by the Morgan family's success. They were married the following spring, and Kieran and Olivia became in-laws, welcoming Emma into the family, making room at the table and in their hearts. Sarah took a teaching position in Unionville's school, moving into a small house in town so she could be close to her work. She was good at it, patient with the children, creative in her lessons, and Olivia attended the end-of-year program and watched her daughter standing in front of a classroom full of students and felt fierce maternal pride. Thomas, at 18, announced he wanted to study business in San Francisco. It was the first time any of their children had expressed interest in leaving Nevada, and Kieran and Olivia struggled with it, wanting him to follow his dreams but afraid of him going so far away to such a big, dangerous city. In the end, they helped him find a reputable school and sent him off with prayers and money and admonitions to write often. The house felt empty with the children gone, too quiet after so many years of noise and activity. Kieran and Olivia had to learn to be just the two of them again, to remember who they were outside of being parents. It was an adjustment, but not an unwelcome one. They discovered they still liked each other, still enjoyed each other's company, still had things to talk about beyond the children. They traveled a bit, taking the train to San Francisco to visit Thomas, to Sacramento to see the capital, even back east once to see places they had only read about. But they always came home to Unionville, to the ranch, to the life they had built. When Olivia was 50 and Kieran 52, Nathaniel and Emma gave them their first grandchild, a boy they named Kieran after his grandfather. Olivia held her grandson for the first time and felt the circle completing, felt the continuation of their family extending into the future, and she cried tears of pure joy. More grandchildren followed. Emma had 3 more children in quick succession, keeping Nathaniel busy and making the ranch house lively again when they visited. Sarah married late, at 32, to a fellow teacher, and they had twins, a boy and a girl. Thomas returned from San Francisco with a degree and a bride, a sharp-minded woman who helped him establish a business buying and selling horses on a much larger scale than the family ranch had ever done. Kieran and Olivia settled into their roles as grandparents, spoiling the children in ways they had never spoiled their own, delighting in the freedom to hand the children back when they got fussy or tired. They hosted large family gatherings for holidays, the house bursting with people and noise and love. 3 generations of Morgans gathered around the table. On their 30th anniversary, their children organized a surprise party, inviting everyone who had been at their wedding 3 decades earlier, the ones who were still alive and able to attend. Olivia walked into the church hall expecting a quiet dinner and found herself facing a room full of people, decorations, a cake that must have taken days to make. She turned to Kieran, who was smiling, clearly in on the secret, and she laughed and cried and let herself be swept up in the celebration. People gave speeches. Nathaniel talked about growing up watching his parents work together, support each other, love each other, and how that had shaped his own marriage. Sarah spoke about her mother's strength and her father's gentleness, and how they had shown her that true partnership meant bringing out the best in each other. Thomas made everyone laugh with stories from his childhood, then made them cry by thanking his parents for supporting his dreams even when it meant letting him go. When it was Kieran's turn to speak, he stood with his arm around Olivia and looked out at the gathered crowd, their children and grandchildren and friends, the community they had been part of for so long. 30 years ago, he said, I walked into a seamstress shop with a torn, blood-stained shirt that had belonged to my brother. I was grieving and lost and had no idea what I was doing with my life. The woman behind the counter took that shirt and promised to mend it, and she did, so perfectly I could barely see where the tear had been. I do not think I understood then, but I understand now. She did not just mend the shirt. She mended me. Week by week, visit by visit, she stitched my broken pieces back together until I was whole again. Everything good in my life, everything you see here tonight, comes from that first moment when Olivia Bennett agreed to fix my brother's shirt. He turned to face her, taking both her hands. You have been my partner, my best friend, the love of my life. You have given me children and grandchildren, a home, a purpose. You have made me happier than I ever thought possible. I love you more now than I did on our wedding day, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond. Olivia was crying too hard to speak, so she just pulled him close and held on tight while everyone applauded. And she thought about that young woman she had been, standing alone in her father's shop, and the cowboy who had walked through her door, and how neither of them could have possibly imagined where that first meeting would lead. The years continued. They grew older together, their bodies slowing down even as their minds remained sharp. Kieran retired from the active work of the ranch, turning it over to Nathaniel while he stayed on as advisor. Olivia's hands grew too arthritic for fine needlework, so she took up knitting instead, making blankets and sweaters for an ever-growing collection of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They sat together on their porch most evenings, watching the sunset over the same sagebrush hills they had been watching for decades, holding hands like young sweethearts. They talked about the past, remembering stories, or sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only came from a lifetime together. When Kieran was 70, he suffered a stroke that left him weakened but still himself. Olivia nursed him through it with the same devotion he had shown her through 3 pregnancies and countless other trials. He recovered enough to walk with a cane and to continue his evening porch sitting, though he needed help getting up and down the steps. I am sorry, he said to Olivia one evening. I know this is not what you signed up for, taking care of an invalid. Hush, she said firmly. You are not an invalid, and even if you were, this is exactly what I signed up for, in sickness and in health, remember. I meant those vows, every word. I know you did. You have always kept your promises. And so have you. They made it to their 40th anniversary, then their 45th. Nathaniel took over more of the ranch work. Sarah retired from teaching. Thomas expanded his business to 3 states. The grandchildren grew up and started having children of their own, and Olivia lost count of how many descendants she and Kieran had. A whole sprawling family tree that had grown from 2 lonely people finding each other. On a morning in early spring, with the cottonwoods beginning to bud and the air smelling of sage and possibility, Kieran had another stroke, massive this time, and he died in the bedroom of the house he had built, holding Olivia's hand, surrounded by children and grandchildren who had gathered when the end was clearly near. I love you, Olivia whispered to him in those final moments. I have loved you every day since you walked into my shop. Wait for me on the other side. I will not be long. He could not speak, but his eyes were clear, and she saw the love there, the recognition, the goodbye. Then he took one last breath and was gone. The funeral was the largest Unionville had seen in years. People came from all over Nevada to pay their respects to Kieran Morgan, a man who had been honest and hardworking and kind, who had built something good and lasting. They buried him in the cemetery on the hill overlooking town, next to the plot that had his name and Olivia's on it, her dates yet to be filled in. Olivia lived another 3 years after Kieran died. They were lonely years despite being surrounded by family. She missed him with an ache that never fully diminished, missed his presence beside her in bed, his voice across the dinner table, his hand in hers during evening walks. She moved into town, into a small house near Sarah's, unable to bear staying at the ranch without him. She spent those years surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling stories about their grandfather, about the old days, about how things used to be. She finished knitting a blanket for every single descendant, determined that each one would have something made by her hands. She organized the family documents and photographs, creating a record of their history for future generations. On a quiet morning in late summer, Olivia died peacefully in her sleep, her hand resting on the wedding ring she had never removed. Her last conscious thought a memory of Kieran walking into her shop so many years before, bringing her a torn shirt and changing her life forever. They buried her next to Kieran, just as she had wanted, and the whole family gathered again to say goodbye. Nathaniel spoke at her funeral, his voice thick with tears. "My parents taught us what love looks like," he said. "Not the easy, showy kind, but the real kind. The kind that shows up every day. The kind that mends what is broken. The kind that builds something lasting. They gave us the greatest gift parents can give their children. They showed us how to love well and be loved in return. Everything good in our family comes from them, from that love." After the funeral, the family gathered at the ranch house, the one Kieran had built and Olivia had made into a home, and they told stories late into the night. They talked about how Kieran had courted Olivia by bringing mending to her shop week after week, until she finally understood. They talked about the shirt with the bullet hole, the one Olivia had mended so perfectly you could barely see the tear, the one that Nathaniel still had, carefully preserved in a cedar chest. They talked about the love that had started between a grieving cowboy and a lonely seamstress, and had grown to encompass all of them, a whole family tree rooted in that first meeting. And in the cemetery on the hill, under the Nevada stars that had watched over Kieran and Olivia for so many years, 2 gravestones stood side by side, their names and dates carved in granite, together in death as they had been in life, their story complete but not forgotten, their love continuing in the hearts and lives of everyone they had touched. The seamstress had mended the cowboy's shirt, and he had kept coming back, week after week, until she finally understood what he was really asking for. Not just mending, but love. Not just repair, but connection. Not just a service, but a life together. And she had said yes. And from that yes had come everything: children and grandchildren, a ranch and a legacy, 50 years of partnership and devotion. A love story that would be told and retold through generations. Proof that sometimes the things that need mending most are not the tears in our clothes but the tears in our hearts, and that the right person at the right time can stitch us back together and make us whole.